As you're filing back in, we're at our final session of the party today. Sarah Mercier is joining us, and she has a tale to tell. I hope you've enjoyed the experience. I know you've been dipping in, dipping out, asking some great questions. Sarah will also be around afterwards. There is a table named for her in the lounge, so she'll join you there if there's questions that linger after she has a chance to share with you today. But Sarah, I'm going to turn things over quickly to you. You have 45 minutes, so I'll make sure you maximize all of your time. And this is Stuck with SCORM. So Sarah, take it away.
Hey everybody, let's talk about some nerdy stuff. This is my second xAPI presentation today. I did one this morning on talking about how to get started with xAPI, but I'm really excited to talk to everyone in this room because we've probably spent all day today talking about all sorts of cool xAPI projects, right? Well, I'm going to talk about an xAPI project that can help you overcome a really common barrier, and that is when you're stuck with an LMS that requires you to use SCORM package content. This is a project that we worked on with a client. So as Mark mentioned, my name is Sarah Mercier, and I work for an organization called Learning Ninjas. And we get the opportunity to work in 3 areas. So we do custom design and development stuff for e-learning and online content. We also work in developing learning ecosystems, so systems and tools and platforms that you need in your learning ecosystem. And the third area is data strategy and xAPI. And so in this project, we were working with one of our clients that we work across all 3 of these areas. And no, Brian, it wasn't this morning at the xAPI party. It was for a different event. It just happened to also be on an xAPI presentation. So for today, I want to talk to you about one of our clients. And I've actually talked about this particular client before for this cohort, but I'm going to share with you something a little bit different today. A different challenge that we've run into. So this organization is GN. So for those of you who have seen me present about their organization before, you should be familiar with them by now. If you're not familiar with this company, you probably have seen their products before. They work in hearing technology. So they have hearing aids like Resound and Belltone. You've probably seen Jabra headsets before, or if you're a gamer, maybe you've used a SteelSeries headset. So that's who GN is as an organization. They work in hearing technology, and they're global. So they're based in Denmark, and they have learners in a lot of different countries. So they work in lots of different markets, and they have an internal LMS, which is Workday. And then they have an external LXP for their external facing training for their customers that is Learn Upon. And so I have talked in the past about one of their projects that we've worked on for their external audience. They create all of their training just using common e-learning tool sets. So everything that I talk about today is just standard e-learning tools. But the challenge that we're talking about today is this fact that they're stuck with Workday for their internal staff. So here's the thing. We did all this really cool xAPI stuff for their external audience to learn more about how their customers were using their training and to figure out where we could make improvements in the training and where things were most effective. Now they are really excited about trying to bring some of that into their internal training. So how can they start to get better data out of their internal training that they provide? But the drawback is that they're stuck with SCORM and Workday. So how did we handle this issue? Talk a little bit about this project. So our project was something we started with very simple. The first question they asked me is, Sarah, can we even do this? Like, can we get any xAPI data? Kind of like we get from our external training if we're hosting it in Workday. And so, well, let's do a little bit of research. Let's see what we can do and where those, limitations will be. So we started off with something small. We started off with an activity that they wanted to track in their internal training for a product launch. So they had a big product launch coming up. They were rolling out training to their internal staff first on the product, it was a hearing aid series. And so the objectives for this particular training was they wanted to see, could their internal staff be given a scenario, and could their staff pick the correct hearing aid out of this new product launch for that scenario? And also, could they pick the correct charger for a given scenario? So a hearing aid charger. This activity that they wanted to include in their training was set up in Storyline. So it's a Storyline activity, and we needed to plug this Storyline activity into Articulate Rise. So because they do a lot of product training, they have to be very flexible in rolling this training out very quickly. And they have to have an internal team of staff that can make minor edits up to the product launch very quickly. And their internal staff is a team of audiologists. So using Articulate Rise gives them the opportunity to make those basic changes a lot easier. But this activity called for something more than what a template-based tool like Rise can do. So we built the activity in Storyline, and we inserted it as a Storyline block. So we wanted to be able to track in this activity, did the person have to, did they get it right the first time, or did they have to try again? And did they use the hint down at the bottom to give them a hint about what they might be choosing? And then how many times did people just get it wrong in the end? So we were trying to figure out, for these little activities that we sprinkled throughout the training, are they able to effectively complete these activities based on a given scenario? So that was our use case for this first little test in Workday. And so what technology did we use in order to track xAPI data when we know we have to package it for SCORM and Workday? How could we still get that xAPI data? So we used a combination of tools. So we started by building it in, we built out the course in Rise. We set up our Storyline block like I just showed you. And in the Storyline block itself, we used xAPI to create the custom statements in Storyline. Then we packaged it up and we added that Storyline block, that xAPI enabled Storyline block into the Rise course. And then you just publish it for SCORM like you normally would and stick it in Workday. And so you get all your typical SCORM reporting out of Workday. Everything is like it normally is. But at the same time, data is being sent to Veracity, which is their LRS that they use also for their external training. And so we're capturing that xAPI data on the side. And actually, it's probably more accurate to have this arrow going from the content over to Veracity than it is from Workday, because it's not technically being sent by Workday. But that's where the content lives. And so how did we set up the xAPI statements, the custom statements? The first thing I just want to give a nod to is that it's really important to keep track of whatever you're doing in xAPI in a profile. And I know that many of you, this is preaching to the choir because this is the xAPI cohort, but they have a simple profile template set up to where we just keep track of everything in a template in Airtable. And I'll actually provide a link to you at the end of this session if you want to have access to this template, because we make it publicly available. So if you want to have a template that you can use in your own organization. But the importance of having this template is keeping track of how are you using verbs when you set up your custom statements. A common example here is, are you using the learner the actor played a video or watched a video? Some of those types of things, the little nuances where you have multiple verbs that could be doing the same thing. How are you being clear about how you're using that stuff in the organization? So we keep track of all of GN's stuff in their Airtable profile. And in this particular activity, we were using answered and viewed. So we were using answered for the answering the activity, so completing the activity, whatever they selected. And then we were using viewed for whether or not they viewed the hint. So that was the verb we used for the hint. Okay, so our setup in xAPI, I'll tell you all what I really love about this tool. Like you could hand code and custom code this stuff yourself, but this made it really fast and a subscription's really inexpensive. So for us, this was a really great option. It gave us the ability to go in and set up all of our custom statements. They're all stored in there. You can copy and paste them. You can store your LRS endpoint information in here. For GN, they have multiple LRSs because they have an internal LRS, they have an external LRS, and they have a testing LRS, right? So being able to send the data to the appropriate place, we're able to just change that in this by selecting a dropdown, right? So we're able to set up the code a lot faster. But you'll notice here that for each question, we had the code for whether they answered it correctly, incorrectly, whether they had to try again, and whether they answered the hint or viewed the hint. And so those were the statements we set up for each question. So once you've got your statements written, you've got everything set up in xAPI, and I know that this is not a session on writing xAPI. I'm hoping that you've learned a lot about that in this cohort. But once you've got your statements set up, then it's as simple as adding a JavaScript command into your content. So for us, our responses, so when you chose correctly, it's going to show a correct slide layer. If it's incorrect, it'll show an incorrect slide layer. If you had to try again, it's got a try again slide layer with some feedback. And so for each one of the responses, there was a slide layer that we could attach that JavaScript to. So we chose to trigger that JavaScript whenever that layer appeared based on whether they got it correct or incorrect or had to try again. So we set that up on the slide layers. We set up that JavaScript command for each one. We made sure we added the context of, having the activity. What was the question? What was the response? That kind of stuff is all set up in those statements. So we set those up in each activity on the slide layers. The other thing that we did, obviously, is we had to get the code so that we could point it at the correct LRS. So you do that in xAPI by going over to the publish side of the application, and there's an option that says LMS and sidecar LRS. So you can go in there and you can set up, you'll notice over on the right here, and I'll show you that in a minute, we have our internal and test LRS set up. We also have, and they have an external LRS too, but we haven't used xAPI for that. One thing I wanted to note, if you're going to do this process, I highly recommend, I think Matt was the one that told me to do this, but I highly recommend turning off allow manual sign-in. Because if you turn that on, then whenever you upload this storyline block activity into Rise, it keeps giving you a login pop-up when you try to publish your course or preview it or anything, which is almost impossible to undo. So make sure that you have manual sign-in turned off. You don't need it anyway for this particular case use case. As I mentioned, you can point to whichever LRS you want. So we have those preloaded in here with the endpoint and credentials. But in the tracking standards, you just pick SCORM because that's how we're going to package it. So that's how we set up our project and got our code. And then we just dropped that particular code to point it to the correct LRS into the slide masters. So from a storyline perspective, it's just adding the JavaScript for your custom statements onto each of those slide layers for the activity, and then adding in where you're pointing your, you're pointing your content to, adding that LRS code into the JavaScript triggers on the master slides. And if you ever are interested in doing this process, I have to say that xAPI has some really good instructions actually inside the application that tells you how to do each of these steps. So you don't have to memorize everything I'm saying right now. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what we got out of our test and what our data look like, because I think this is super helpful. First of all, as I mentioned, this went into their internal LRS so that we could separate their internal and external training results. One of the things that stood out to me during this test is that Workday did not pass the actor through in any meaningful way. So everything came through as Workday Learner. Now, this probably is not a huge deal for what we are using it for, because we still have all the SCORM tracking inside of Workday. So if you're looking for complete or incomplete, or somebody passed or failed or whatever is important to you, you can get that stuff from SCORM anyway. So it's probably not that important that it's sending that to your LRS unless it's part of some analytics that you're trying to do on that side. So I do think that it's important to note that actor information, it is a unique actor that's being passed through, but it's not giving you any kind of contextual information for who that actor actually was. But we were able to see what the result was. So we got the response because we had programmed that all into the statements in xAPI. So all of that came through beautifully. It even came through the name of the question. We had programmed all this stuff into that xAPI statement, and it all passed through beautifully. So we are able to see all of that information. And then we created some visualizations. So these are the 5 activities that were built into that one for one of the modules. These were the ones for the hearing aids, not the chargers. But you can see in question 1, what we found is that in the first few questions, we had several people get it correct. And this is just like pilot testing it. But you can see that only one person used the hint. A couple of people got it incorrect. So, and you could only get it incorrect if you missed it twice. So there were a couple of people that even with a hint and even with the feedback on the try again, they still got it incorrect. So I thought that was interesting information to have. And that seemed to be a trend on the first couple of questions. By questions 3 and then 4 and 5, people started getting these correct. So one of the things that we're evaluating is, are questions 4 and 5 just easier? Was the feedback sufficient in the earlier questions that we provided if they missed it the first time? Were the hints sufficient to give them a good idea? Are the questions clear enough? Because it may be that our questions aren't clear enough and maybe there's more than one right answer based on that scenario. So it gave us a little bit of insight into evaluating what our questions, if there were any modifications we needed to make to those or any changes. So it started to give us a lot more information than obviously what you would have from a SCORM perspective, just starting to dig into some of this stuff a little bit more, see if people were using the hints and how they were working with this custom interaction. So what's next after our pilot? All right, the big things for GN are really looking at refining their content. So they have these rollouts that happen a couple times a year. They have new products, and every time that there's a project rollout, we're trying to figure out, are there things that we can learn from this and to refine future activities? So obviously evaluating the content itself, making sure that all the information was adequately covered. That was one of the things that we looked at for that particular couple of courses, is what was that actually sufficiently covered in the materials, in the content early on? Did we need to provide additional practice activities earlier in the course? Did we need to provide improve our feedback or the hints? So those were some of the things that started to come up for us early in the process. Ultimately, I think what came out of this test is that I don't think that they want to use Workday anymore. So I think that although this was a really useful test, and if it's something that, ends up continuing to be a challenge that we have to stay with it, then we know how we can collect some things. But that being said, one of the things they're now trying to determine is, could they set up their own internal employee portal and Learn Upon for their internal training? So they're really starting to look at, is this actually the right platform for us to do internal training? I saw a question from Sam in the chat. So the split reporting is cool. Let's see. Basically looking at the LRS to improve the content itself and the existing. And for this Workday example, yes, because of the limitations of how this is set up, then yes. I would say that it doesn't mean that you couldn't, though. It does mean that so if you were looking at user-specific evaluation, you'd have to do it as a roll-up, Sam, because you don't have real actor information, right? So you could roll that up and say, as a whole, this is how people are performing on these types of questions. So I would say it's a both and. It's evaluating our content, but also rolling that up to say, as a whole, here's how many users were able to successfully complete this internally. So I would say it's a both and. Let's see. Domino does a hybrid publish like this. With Domino, let's see, you could keep your LMS happy with SCORM and happy. Nice, that's good. And that's good to know. I think that some of this is symptomatic of the tools that you use for development for sure, right? So if you are stuck with this type of setup right? Where you're using standard tools in the e-learning space. And your standard tool happens to be one that sends kind of canned xAPI data and doesn't give you a whole lot of access to stuff like we have with Rise, then you're going to be stuck with some of this stuff, right? It's like and that's why I kind of wanted to draw out some of those nuances. If you have the option to improve your tool set, definitely other options from a development perspective. If you have more control over the front end and what you're pulling and building your content in, you could have a lot better data. But it's interesting to know this. Do you know, Megan, for Domino, does it actually in Workday, do you know if the actor gets passed through, or do you know? Because I think that might be a Workday thing where the actor information is just kind of getting randomized. Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen that. So that might be something to consider too, is just evaluating your tool set to see, and maybe that's something we can do too. That's a good idea, is just trying a different tool and see if it passes through the information any differently. I think that the Rise limitations have been a fun one for this client, but it's the trade-off, right? It's what data do you actually need? What's most important to you? And then making the trade-off of how quickly do I need to put this information together in a format that's accessible and mobile friendly and those kind of things. So it kind of, and easy for people to develop that aren't e-learning developers. It kind of gets into that weird use case, you know? Yeah, for sure. I think now I want to play around with some more testing. So, and I don't know if Kelly is on the call. I had invited Kelly from GN to come in, but it's definitely something. She has been amazing and kind of going through. So Kelly is at GN. She is their learning platform administrator. And so she handles Learn Upon, Workday, all of the LMS functionality and LXP functionality. And she also manages the LRS with me. So I've kind of onboarded her to it, and now she's just run with it. And she's setting up all sorts of visualizations and renaming object IDs in the LRS and all sorts of things. So she's been really great on this project. But I know that anything that we bring up where we're like, let's see if we can do this, she's like, oh, okay. So it'll be a new thing for us to play with for sure. All right. So with that, I wanted to share resources with you. So 4 resources that came out of this project that I think would be really helpful. One is just our xAPI Basics course, is something that's actually what Kelly used to get up to speed at GN to help manage her whole LRS and everything. So that's something that would be a good resource to check out. Also, the xAPI profile template that I shared earlier in Airtable, that is freely available. You do have to create an Airtable account. It's a free account, but you don't have to use Airtable if you don't want to. You can actually download that template and open it in Excel. So if that's something you're interested in, don't feel limited by the actual tool itself. And then, of course, xAPI. So again, it saved us a ton of time to be able to put together those custom statements and save them and duplicate them. And it was really a nice addition to this project. And then we used Veracity as the LRS, and they have very easy to set up an LRS at lrs.io. So those are the tools for you to check out for this session. And I know I told Mark that I was going to definitely talk for at least 30 minutes, but I think, Mark, I've finished even earlier than I expected. But I want to stick around for questions if there are any additional questions. And then also just provide some contact information for you all. So that way, if you want to get in touch with us, or definitely if you want to contact me directly, please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you all and your projects as well. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Hey, that was cool. Good to be back.
Yeah, I told you I thought that it would be fast. I didn't think it would be that fast.
That's all right. No, it doesn't. I think everybody appreciates the fact that you can cover it, answer the questions, pull people into the conversation. To me, it's always a pleasure to watch you present, Sarah. So,
oh, thank you.
I enjoyed that. See, are any questions popping in that you haven't seen? It doesn't look like.
Yeah, I don't think so. I hope I haven't missed anything.
No. Let's give everybody just a couple minutes here, or I should probably say like a minute to formulate any questions they might have. And like I said at the top of the hour, Sarah will be around, can jump into a table if there's something you want to engage with her after we close out the session. You can pop over there and she'll stick around. If nobody shows up for 5 minutes, she's got things to do and we'll probably head on out herself. So good. I'm not seeing anything, Sarah.
That means I did a really great job presenting this.
That's
now
it.
Everybody knows how to do it and is
That's
immediately going to start doing this right now.
That's right. That was it. Nailed it. All right, everybody. That looks like it. I'm watching. Wait. Do you want to say it was great to see you? Yes, that's nice. Thanks, Sam. All right, everybody. So I'm going to close the session. I'm going to close out the day. So this was my first time hosting the party and all these amazing sessions that came through. It's an educational experience for me. It's an experience for the team itself to see the passion around xAPI in this community. So we really appreciate your contributions. Appreciate you attending today. And obviously, the great questions that keep coming through here in the Slack channel. Please keep an eye open for the fall cohort. That'll be opening up again. I know we get a lot of repeat people coming in, still growing in their knowledge. So make sure that you're aware. By being a member of the guild is also a way to keep yourself informed, opting into those emails. So Sarah, thank you for closing out our day. And I'm going to end the session. And hopefully some of you will join Sarah at the tables. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.